Hello and welcome to Microsoft 365 Backup Checklist for 2023. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this Veeam Trailblazer talk. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Now, we've got an action-packed session that will take up our full time allotment today, so we won't have time for a live Q&A session. However, the experts at Veeam will see all of your questions afterward and be able to get back to you, so send those questions along. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A, and we will provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to 3 links from Veeam. There's a Microsoft 365 backup guide from Veeam. There's a free 30-day trial of Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. And there's a Gartner report answering the question, should I back up Microsoft 365? Also in there, you'll find a link to the Actual Tech Media Guerrilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access all those resources now and share them with your friends and your colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing are also in your handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to get your questions answered. So if you do have a question for Veeam, go ahead and send that in. And we will get it to Veeam. And to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Edward Watson, who's a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Veeam, and Corinne Bissett, Global Technologist for Product Strategy at Veeam. It's always great to hear from these two, and I'm going to turn things over to Edward to get us started.
To M365 Backup Checklist for 2023. I'm Edward Watson, Principal Product Marketing Manager at Veeam, and I'm joined by Corinne Bissett, our technologist. And look, we're really excited because at the beginning of this year, I'm sure that many of you had resolutions, right? And maybe on that resolution list, it was let's protect some of the workloads that we don't protect yet, or maybe augment our existing backup strategies. And that's something many organizations are doing because we all know, or at least many of us know, that we are not immune to data loss, especially when it comes to software as a service applications. In this case, ESG actually asked that very question. In the past 12 months, has your organization experienced some kind of data loss or corruption in any applications for SaaS? And actually, it was surprising that half of those organizations had actually experienced that in the past 12 months. And of those 53% that said yes, there were 59% that said we don't do anything to actually protect our SaaS resident application data. So definitely pretty concerning stats there. And that is what's driving a lot of organizations, because ultimately there are many companies that recognize the risks. And maybe some of these risks are familiar to you. Maybe some of these are kind of, coming onto your radar. But in any case, it's interesting that now, and really it makes sense that now cybersecurity attacks are top of mind, of course, for many organizations, followed by things like accidental deletions, compliance. Do I have the restoration capabilities that I need? So definitely very much aware today of these risks. So let's jump into this checklist of, if you are evaluating backup vendors today, If you are looking to deploy a strategy in the future around M365 or even just SaaS in general, a lot of this applies to SaaS. Make sure, number one, deployment flexibility, right? So let's start at ground zero. How do you want to actually deploy this backup solution? So there's many companies that say, I want this backup infrastructure maybe closer to home. Maybe I want that on-premises deployment. Start out small. Maybe I want to start scaling it out. Maybe I want to deploy it in one of the hyperscale clouds. Of course, Redmond being that Microsoft, you guys are mostly the Microsoft folks. Of course, you can or should be able to deploy that in Azure if possible, in many cases, or the other hyperscalers as well. And of course, even backup as a service. There's many companies that want to just simply offload that backup as a service or backup, a lot of those backup capabilities to a service provider. So whatever the life cycle is, on-prem to cloud or giving up that control with as a service, you should be able to achieve that with one vendor, which can be a bit of a challenge to do, but ultimately should be important to be able to do. Number two, why don't you start taking us through these other items here, Corinne?
Just to add on to what Edward was going into about your deployment flexibility, but also the freedom of where you're sending your data to. And it's really important to point out, especially since what's going on with the data privacy happening in Europe right now and around Google Cloud and the forced movement from Google Cloud over to other software as a service out there because they weren't able to meet data privacy regulations to meet compliance for GDPR. So having the flexibility of where you're able to store that data and making sure those data entities are able to meet your compliance regulations and be able to quickly move that data when it makes sense to your business or when regulations change at like a turn of a hat and you want to stay within those compliances, choosing between those different varieties is crucial to day-to-day business. The number one at the top of the list here is having the option for object storage. If you plan on doing anything that has a volatile data type, meaning that it might grow overnight significantly. So Exchange is going to have those 10 meg emails at a max, but generally we're doing 2 megs on a daily basis. So you don't really expect a huge growth overnight. But looking at SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams, as soon as we start opening this up and driving user adoption, that data grows significantly in the terabytes overnight. So you need an object storage or a type of storage that's going to grow with this data capacity as data is needed. Then coming down these other choices in the line, you're going to have to worry in some cases about this capacity planning, but the flexibility to choose between an on-premises solution or what you have available today might be what's necessary for your business, and the flexibility to choose between that really makes a huge difference in the freedom of your backup vendors, even if it comes down to using something that might not be an optimal protocol like a SMB or a share type of repository. And taking it up with the hybrid approach, Edward?
Yeah, so we know that there's, a lot of backup solutions, they might just focus on M365, Exchange Online, OneDrive for Business, maybe Teams. They might only focus on the on-prem applications, right? So having one solution that encompasses your entire environment, all the applications, all the critical apps, whether on-prem or in the cloud, very, very important, much more important than really I think we give credit to. This goes into not being able to really predict what kind of event might trigger the need for recovery. Sometimes attack vectors start on premises and they move to the cloud, sometimes vice versa. So we really need to be able to have a streamlined data protection approach that really encompasses this entire environment. Number 4, with control of scope, Corinne.
So every environment is drastically different, which is really, I'd say, the driving factor behind why software as a service really exploded in this industry. Is you have the flexibility of your users, your sites, and your teams, and being configured in a way that's very easy. Well, you need a backup solution that's going to allow you to easily import all of those into your solution and be able to create tiers based off of not just maybe your entire organization, if you don't want to back up your entire organization under the same scope, but maybe based off of groups or the individual teams and users having different SLAs. So making sure that the scope can be as inclusive on the types of imported items, as well as being dynamic on the types of groups and objects that you can exclude from those individual jobs inside of the different flexibilities of, can I just back up once a day? Can I back up multiple times a day? Maybe I have a monthly job for all of my development accounts. Having the choice and flexibility of that becomes very important when you're talking about the amounts of data that's moving through the infrastructure. And the adoption between teams.
Why don't you take us through this one, Corinne?
Yeah. So Teams is really an abstraction layer of a lot of back-end offerings from Microsoft. When you think about sending a message between two different users inside of the Teams interface, this is actually called a chat, and that's a one-on-one conversation that uses the Exchange Online back-end for your calendars, your contacts, your meetings, and all of the files that you're working with. Anytime that you're talking to someone inside of a team and a channel and you're sharing OneNotes between these different team items, you're actually using the Exchange back end. And even whenever you have a file sitting on your desktop and you copy that file from your desktop through your chat and send it to another user, you're using your OneDrive back end to send a chat to another user with that file in it. So Teams is not a self-contained application, and you need a backup software that understands that there's an abstraction layer of metadata that contains your settings, your members, and your structures to these back-end data entities, is not only able to restore back the symbolic links that exist within the Teams interface, but the back-end data repositories within like Exchange and OneDrive and all of these other impertinent areas.
Yeah, great point, Corinne. You know, we absolutely cannot make the assumption that all backup vendors use the latest Microsoft APIs. We just can't make that assumption. So definitely add that to your checklist. Keep SLAs at the forefront, right? So am I able to meet my recovery point objectives, right? Determining the frequency with which backups are created and could potentially be lost, or recovery time objectives, the length of time that it'll take to restore and get back to business as usual, right? Number one, do I have my RPOs and RTOs defined? Step two, can my backup vendor actually meet those requirements? Because if they can't, then we might want to look elsewhere, right? So make sure that's adequately defined. Of course, you're all smart people on the line, so I'm sure you're already thinking ahead here. But if they're not defined, let's define them and make sure that backup vendor can meet them. And recovery options, Corinne, what's the importance around these?
So I would argue to say backing up is definitely essential, but recovering is 10 times more important than the backup process itself, because it might be kind of difficult to get going sometimes to start with, but being able to recover in a sense that makes sense to your organization becomes the number one front of mind. You need to know if you can back up and restore to other locations. Can you export those files if it's necessary for compliance? If you export that file, does it export as the format that's going to be importable to your organization? How is that going to read? Are you going to be able to actually parse the data within the file, or is it just going to read as if you're looking at a picture that you can't actually see the data within? It's also important to know if you're able to access the data through additional portals. Does everyone need to have access directly into the backup server in order to perform restore processes? Are there different levels of access? Because that could compromise access to the backup process itself. And on top of all of this, what kind of reporting do you have around the restore processing itself? If you have someone restoring data from your CTO and you have no tracking, you may have some compromised exchanges of emails in your organization. So making sure you have some critical components around the restoration capabilities inside of your solution covered within your backup is a #1 question you should probably be asking your organizations.
Okay, and search capabilities, right? How can I explore all the various components of my backups, whether it's just the backup jobs themselves, whether it's single organizations, multiple organizations, or all your organizations? Point in time, do I have the ability to use a latest available state functionality, or a specific point in time? Can I explore within that and be able to easily get that data back? Can I leverage things like advanced search, where I can use very specific criteria to narrow down and find the exact data set that I need? I think these are all questions that we need answered, and especially as we're talking to backup vendors, making sure that we have our individual search criteria mapped out of what we need to search, how we need to explore within our individual organization, because this is not a one-size-fits-all. Every company is obviously different, so very important there. And to summarize this, to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, we've got, you obviously want an organization to work with a backup company that encompasses the majority of your applications in your environment. You want that flexibility and choice, right? Deploy how you want, utilize any storage you want, no lock-ins, flexible job configurations. You really want to look at innovation, right? These are actually, I know we're kind of doing a bit of a wrap up here with this checklist, but these are actually IDC's suggestions around features, flexibility, choice, innovation, scale, making sure that you work with a vendor that can handle any number of users. And really, as you continue to grow your M365 seats, continue to handle that even up to the 10,000 plus users as you continue to adopt that solution. Integrations, are they natively integrated with M365? Do they have a large ecosystem of different partners to work with and different storage vendor and capabilities that you might want to leverage in the future? And ultimately, do they have a breadth of service? Are you going to be able to work with a vendor that not only handles your SaaS workloads or M365, but also some of your other cloud workloads, your physical, virtual, instead of having to piecemeal by application across multitude of vendors? So very important to consider. Am I going to be able to use one solution that encompasses all my workloads? And we're talking about Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. That's a lot of the attributes you've heard today, a lot of the items on the checklist. We really encompass very well in this solution for Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Microsoft Teams. We do leverage, of course, the latest APIs for Teams, and really provide you a lot of what we've been talking about today. Infrastructure freedom. We provide you the ability to back up as often as every 5 minutes and tier that protection across a multitude of departments that you might have. Whether you want to back up one department, every 5 minutes, or another department once every day. So really being able to tailor that backup approach and really offer great recovery flexibility. So whether it's back to M365, to on-premises, or to another environment, sending or saving or exporting, Corinne's going to show a little bit more detail on some of those options. And scalable recovery, right? I think we can't understate the importance of, can I recover quickly, right? Can I do a bulk recovery so I'm not selecting individual users? And that brings us to version 7. So if you have not heard, version 7 just came out, didn't it, Corinne? Do you want to walk us through what's all the goodness in version 7 here?
Definitely. And as I'm going through version 7, I just want to give a small reminder out there that everyone is 100% able to ask questions, and we want to answer as many of those at the end of this webcast as we can. So keep those in mind as we're going through the new features and the demo. Get those questions in so we can get those answered for you. So to start off with our version 7, we had some tremendous features released. First of all, we had a feature released which is any object storage to any object storage backup copies, with that backup copy being immutable. So immutable means that that secondary copy has the option of being completely locked down so no one can actually modify it once it's been saved to that secondary repository. And we gave it the agnostic ability of being any type of large cloud provider or your own homegrown S3 storage, anything that is compatible with that object lock repository. The next is a lot around these integrations that we have with some of the other products in our suite, the first of which I am going to do a demo on today is Veeam 1. Veeam 1 is our monitoring flagship product that's linked mostly to our Veeam backup and replication product and mostly known for that. But now we have integrations with our Veeam backup for Microsoft 365. So you can now monitor your jobs, your proxies, your integrations with your repositories. And we have 10 built-in alarms, which give you the basics of pretty much every support case we were able to go through and see what were the #1 requests that people want information on. The next is our service providers out there. So we have an entire ecosystem of service providers, and we've integrated directly not just the license, but the ability for customers to go in and service providers to offer directly through their service provider console now the ability to gain backup for Microsoft 365, launch the self-service portal from their side once it's configured by their service provider, and manage their own backups. So we're helping provide this synonymous relationship. So if you're already in a service provider relationship with one of our service providers, you're able to reach out and possibly get that service today. Last is the self-service portal. Version 1 was released in version 6 of our product. And in this newer iteration, we upgraded the console, we added Microsoft Teams, and we added point-in-time restoration. And that's another one I'm going to go ahead and give you a small demo on today. Before we get to the demo, just a kind of overarching product view, just to kind of put all of these pieces that we've been talking about and some of the features we've been talking about in the best practices and the checklist and to how those integrate into our product line itself. We do work in hybrid environments. You can even add in multiple tenants into the same console inside of our software. So say you run a campus environment where you may have multiple schools that you're in charge of and multiple small businesses that you're in charge of. You could add those all into the same Veeam backup for Microsoft 365 server and be able to then ecosystem out into the repositories of your choice. You're not limited to having just one repository added in. You could add in multiple repositories and say have email go to a local repository and tier off to an object storage repository, your OneDrive, or any other volatile data type that may grow significantly overnight. Then the ability to offload your longer-term storage to a cloud entity or even an on-premises object storage if you so choose, or a cloud provider that is, say, Wasabi or one of those smaller vendors out there. Next, we have 4 application recovery explorers. And on top of that, we have a self-service portal that allows you to launch all of these application recovery processes from an HTML format. From any of these portals, you can restore back to the original location to new locations. You're able to export data with the self-service portal. You're able to orchestrate restorations on behalf of yourself or as a restore operator on behalf of other users back to their original locations for them. Then on top of all of this suite, we're able to now do monitoring to help make sure you have a copy window of protection in your environment. And that's what we're going to go ahead and take a look at, is all of the incredible restoration capabilities on top of the monitoring that we now have over 50 different ways in our console. And I'll go ahead and get that share started up here.
And while you're teeing that up, Corinne, I did get a question, quite a few questions on whether they'll be receiving this video. And yes, indeed, you'll be receiving this video after the presentation.
We have the console here. If you're actually familiar with Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, there's not a whole lot that's changed. It's actually the same console. There is a really important additive here under the backup infrastructure section. When you add in a new object storage repository, and we'll go ahead and add in a new one here, and we'll go with an Azure blob just for argument's sake. Just so we can see that here, we have the ability to add in an object storage with this immutable copy. This one checkbox here allows any object storage that you've added in that has the versioning on blob storage or object lock configured for S3 compatible storage to automatically take effect for the retention configured on the repository. So when we've added in this repository here, we've added in based off of the Azure immutable repository, and we gave it a 7-day retention. This means for 7 days, no matter what we put on here, I can't go into Azure, an admin can't go into Azure, the CEO of our company can't go into Azure, no one impersonating us can go into Azure and delete this. You can't call Microsoft and go into Azure and delete this. There is absolutely no way to delete the secondary copy of data. We've had a couple of conversations come up very recently of what's the #1 way to protect against insider threats. I would say this is probably the #1 way to protect against insider threats, because I've had people on my team say, hey, I've tested out in our lab the new demo. How do I clean up the lab environment? And I just look at them and said, how long have you set your retention for? Because we can't. The data's there until it's out. And it's a fun conversation to have. So inside of the console here, we've set up a couple different jobs, and it's really easy to set up all of your primary jobs. And then all you need to do is set up to that secondary repository your primary job data and copy that data off. And you can choose whether or not you want the copy immediately, or even set up a window in case you do have an on-premises copy of that data and you're tiering this off to an off-site location and you don't want this data to affect, say, a business hour window, you could set up business hours and tell it not to run during certain times. Next, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our new portal. Now, the really neat thing about our portal is it uses your Microsoft login. Now, I have already signed in on this Chrome with my Microsoft login, so it went ahead and passed through. And I have this new role that's called the Restore Operator. I have the Restore Operator assigned to my user. I can change my scope and select any one that's been assigned to my Restore Operator, including what's now Teams. So I can select a team here, and select a point in time that's within the backup cycle. So if the backup does run multiple times a day, I'd be able to see that here. And I can hit apply, and it'll go to the backup server and pull up the backups from the teams in order to be able to restore data from, say, the files, the post tabs, or anything else I would be able to normally restore if I was directly on that server. Another addition that we've added in is the ability to restore entire folders. So I can now restore entire folders back to those original locations. So I could select this entire folder and add it to the restore. I can go ahead and process and finish. Then I can easily go back and select myself here on the list, so the current user. Then I can select the restore point. And if you notice, I have additional restore points here because I'm in a different job on that server that happens to run multiple times a day. And I can select any of the restore points that I happen to have data within to restore from. Now we're going to go ahead and switch gears over to the monitoring side, which I promise is going to help make sense to why this server here has errors, because it makes this side a little bit more interesting for us. Got to intentionally make some errors here. All right. So we'll get this up first. This is the Veeam 1 console. Now, the client side is the physical version of the console where you're able to come in and see a overarching view of your infrastructure, whether you're working with the backup infrastructure, the virtualization infrastructure, or in this case, the Microsoft 365 side. The summary view allows us to see the number of users, groups, sites, the repositories, and the proxies that are within this specific scope that I have selected over here. If I had multiple servers on this list, I could select multiple servers up here, and all of those servers would be represented below under the summary window. Since I only have the one server on this list, I see all of the objects under selecting this one server. If I scope down to the repository, it does get more granular to the types of objects, which repository holds those specific objects, and if those repositories were happen to run out of space or getting close to running out of space, it would actually alert me and let me know, like, hey, and show up as a red bar, and use space would be running out on this list. Since we are using object storage repositories, it does give us some leeway as to this is not running out of space on us. If you do have performance issues or you need to know settings and how many jobs are running and processing on your different proxies, this is a quick way to look across multiple proxies without having to need to go to each individual proxy to chase down a possible performance issue if you have a larger installation in your environment. In this case, we can see that we have some warnings and alarms. We can go to our Alarms tab and instantly start to dive into what could possibly be going wrong here, and we give some kind of high-level knowledge and tips for reasons that might cause this without even needing to think about opening a support ticket, which can be useful to kind of get started. And if you start to notice these happen during certain times of day or certain times of the week, you might be able to trace down this happens during maybe an update window or when something else is going on in your environment. And you can tailor your jobs to possibly not start during those times and mitigate overexertion of resources in your infrastructure. Inside the console here, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the other alarms that you're able to configure and change the thresholds on. So in the console, we don't just have the ability to have alerts, but we have the ability to configure mitigation to any of these alerts. So say we have a job that was disabled, we can change what happens when a job is disabled. We can tell it to notify multiple entities in the organization. We could tell this job to say, hey, open a support ticket if this job ever gets disabled. That way we have extra alerting if something happens and maybe backups are not coming from this server. Over here we have exceed the license. We can change the threshold and actions that happen from there as well. And one of my personal favorite features is actually around the Veeam One web client. The Veeam One web client offers something that I like to call the coffee window. This not only takes, say, the Veeam backup and replication side, but this takes your infrastructure side and everything else and puts it into this nice window. You can edit these layouts, and you can share this out to all of the stakeholders that need to be alerted of what's going on. It may not be that they are the key stakeholders to fix what's happening in the infrastructure, but they may need to know, hey, backup server 1 may have an issue, and the more eyes that can see that there's a problem in your infrastructure, the more likely someone's going to immediately take action against something like this happening. And we'll go ahead and pass it back here. And I think Edward has some resources for us to take back and some cleanup.
Yeah, I gotta say though, fantastic demo of everything new in version 7. And I think you can all tell on the call that we're pretty passionate about these new features and what they're gonna do to help customers and organizations like yourself. We also, I do wanna mention, we actually came out with some platform releases. So that's our larger platform at Veeam that encompasses virtual machines, cloud, physical, and we've released a lot of great new things here just a month ago across data security, recovery, and offering data freedom. So definitely, if you're interested in more information around the Veeam data platform enhancements, we definitely recommend you to go to veeam.com for that. And we also want to mention that this solution, Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, trusted by over 30,000 customers now, 14 million protected seats, lots of recognizable industries and lots of recognizable companies, pardon me, and varied industries leverage this solution. But do not take our word for it. Please do your own research. You know, I think we've provided quite a bit of good information, I believe, on you know, starting that checklist and what to add to that checklist. Definitely add this to your checklist. These review sites, TrustRadius and G2 Crowd, these provide, these two third-party review platforms really provide some great insights on what are admins actually saying about these backup solutions. How do these backup solutions actually compare apples to apples? So really highly recommend you to dive into to G2 Crowd and TrustRadius and see for yourself. And a few additional takeaways. If you don't have your QR scanners out yet, now is the time. So if you need some additional information on what industry analysts like Gartner says about Microsoft 365 Backup, please download this report. This will be great for you to find out more information on what the wider industry analysts feel about M365 data protection as a whole. And of course, please download this guide, this Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 guide, if you're interested in more of the technical features and how this actually works on a much deeper level in terms of getting up and running. And ultimately, see for yourself, if you have not downloaded a free 30-day trial, you can actually get this solution free for 30 days, meaning you get the full functionality. And once those 30 days are up, you can continue to use the product free, but it is limited to 10 users. So you can maybe back up a small department or maybe the C-suite completely free forever.
All right. Well, thanks, Edward and Corinne, for a great Veeam Trailblazer talk there. We really appreciate your time today. And Arlene, thanks for the high five there for Edward and Corinne, and Jay. Appreciate the kudos about the demo. I agree, it was a great demo. So we did have it looks like about 20 questions from you guys that we will get pass along to Veeam with more questions coming in even now. And one last thing, if you did maybe miss the QR codes with your phones, all three of those resources that Edward was showing there at the end are available with links in the handout section. That was that backup guide by Veeam, the 30-day trial, and that Gartner report. They are all included as links in the handout section. So you still have a minute to grab those if you'd like to get those resources. Okay, well, finally, it's time for the Amazon gift card prize drawing, and the winner of our $250 Amazon gift card today is Aubrey Jones from Missouri. So congratulations to Aubrey. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And thanks, as always, for attending and for all of your great questions. That concludes this event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.